Hi, folks. Welcome to our PhD to Industry panel. These folks on your panel today are PhDs 1 year into their industry roles. And today we're going to learn a little bit about their journeys, their experience, so that those of you in attendance can get a sense of what's possible in an industry role, what you can expect to face as challenges, what you can see as opportunities. Today's your chance to get more context and learning there. And my hope is that folks walk away from today with a greater sense of opportunity for what's possible with your PhD in industry. So as we get started, I'd like to get a sense of who's in attendance. So attendees, if you could drop into chat what stage you're at. Are you in your PhD? Are you post-PhD? What year of your PhD you're in? Just drop those into chat so that the panel and I can get a sense of who's here. First year PhD, postdoc, faculty, ABD, postdocs, recent PhD. Nice. And for those who are just joining, just a heads up, we're going to have the attendees on mute and off video so that we can record this discussion. All right, so panel, you can see we've got a big range here, right? We've got folks all the way from first year PhD to postdoc, ABD, faculty. And so as you're answering questions, just bear in mind that we've got folks at those different stages. Sound good? Awesome. All right, so let's get kicked off with some introductions and norms. So attendees, I'm going to start off with some introductions of our panelists and pre-prepared questions. And then at various points, I'll jump in and have you drop questions in chat that I will read to our panelists. We have a lot of attendees. I will do my best to get to as many questions as I can, but can't guarantee we'll get to everyone just because we've got so many folks on the call today. And so we are going to start off with those introductions, do those questions, and have moments for your questions. And we're going to make sure to wrap at the hour to be respectful of the folks' time. Norms, attendees, please hold gratitude for our panelists sharing their time and know that you'll get the most from today if you are present. Also, as a heads up, folks are speaking on behalf of themselves and not on behalf of their organizations. All right, so let's get started with introductions of myself and our panel, and then we'll kick off with some questions. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tori Waber, and I'm a career and leadership coach. I received my PhD in human evolutionary biology from Harvard back in 2012. I then, after a year of postdoc, worked as a data scientist at Facebook, and then worked at Google as a people analyst and growth marketing manager. I enjoy helping PhDs move into industry because I made that leap myself. And I've now helped more than 50 folks make that same transition. All right, for our panel, we have Dominic Gibson, who completed his PhD in psychology at the University of Chicago. He's now a senior social science researcher at Foundry 10. Wave hi, Dominic. Nice. All right, and Kinga Hill completed her PhD in environmental science at Clarkson University. She's now a data scientist at Storm Sensor. Christina Odell completed her PhD in education at the University of Rhode Island, and she's currently a Workday project manager at Alchemy, alchemy.us, I suppose, yes. And lastly, we have Utsav Manjir, who completed his PhD in economics at Northwestern. He's currently a research scientist at Facebook. All right, welcome panel. So we're gonna get kicked off panel with some icebreaker questions, some quick lightning round questions to really get to know a little bit about you before we chat about your industry move. You guys ready?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so with these icebreakers, let's get going. Kinga, Mac or PC?
PC.
PC. Christina, cats or dogs?
Dogs all day.
Utsav, R or Python?
R.
R, okay, got a preference there. Dominic, espresso or drip coffee?
Drip.
Drip coffee, nice. Kinga, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
No.
Okay, strong perspective there. Christina, when was the last time you ate chocolate?
Literally 10 minutes ago, I just brought my kids for ice cream. So yeah.
Nice. Utsav, last emoji that you used?
Probably the smiley, I would say, but I'm not really sure. I use more than I should. So,
So lots. Happy answer. Nice. And Dominic, what's the weirdest item currently in your field of view?
I'm using this Lego box to prop up my laptop right now.
Nice.
So a Lego box. Wait, is it made of Legos or is it the box the Legos came in?
I think there are Legos inside of it, but it's shaped like a giant Lego as well.
Nice. Oh, that's fun. Awesome. All right, so that's gotten us started off. Let's dive in on questions that might be relevant to the folks here, the folks who are in their PhDs, postdocs, or faculty positions seeking industry roles. And so Kinga, we're going to start off with you, but other panelists, please jump in as you think of responses here. So I think many of our attendees will be curious about how you made the decision to leave academia. Can you share your rationale on why you chose to leave and how that choice sits with you now that you're a year into industry?
Sure. So I got my PhD in 2016 and jumped on the academic hamster wheel pretty quickly. So I picked up these temporary positions. So visiting assistant professor, lecturer, postdoc, I jumped around. So my most recent one, my postdoc, I was in my second year of that and facing that next academic cycle. And I don't know, I was just like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Getting a full-time tenure track position is so difficult. And I tried very hard, this was going to be my fourth cycle of the academic application. And I was like, I just don't want to do this. I have 3 little children and I move them across the country for every one of those roles. And I was like, I can't, I really can't. I got to try something else. So I started exploring roles in the private sector and I got connected to a Facebook group of academics who are leaving and started conversations there. So that was like my first light bulb was that I just cannot be on that hamster wheel anymore. And then I learned what private sector salaries were like. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely leaving. So those are my 2 biggest incentives.
I would just affirm everything that Kinga said. Similarly, I was getting ready to apply for roles, faculty roles, and I have 3 children, 2 under the age of 5, and I'm location bound. And so when I started that process really quickly, I just knew it wasn't going to be for me. And a major reason why I left was finances, was salary. As a first generation college student and with lots of student debt and thinking about the possibility of, all the goals we have as a family, I knew that I needed to make more money. And so that was a primary driver for me.
Yeah, maybe I can add a little bit too. I think for me, it was, kind of a choice, like when I had the choice of going to academia or industry, I was thinking of the incentives and, more of the personal incentives in the sense that, I enjoyed research, but I didn't know if my only output was going to be academic papers, if that drove me or not. So I think in industry was agreeing with everything Kinga and Christina said. Adding to that, I think what I enjoyed in industry is that I can still use the same tools of research, the skill set I learned in grad school, but working on projects that were faster paced. I could do different things. An academic paper is fun for the first few months, but then you're in that peer review process for, months and years on end. In industry, it's been different. So I think that's it was a leap of faith when I took that choice, and I think it's been validated so far.
I'll just add that I agree with everyone else. I also have 2 kids and that was definitely a factor. But I also really didn't decide to leave academia until I was considering academic and non-academic positions. I applied to both at the time that I applied for my current role. So yeah, I think that you don't necessarily have to know from the beginning that that's what you want to do.
And so just to pause on that for a moment, quick show of hands, panelists, how many of you did at least 1 season on the faculty market? Nice. Oh, Christina, you did as well.
I did.
Yeah. And so it sounds like that's sort of exploring both paths you explored the faculty path as well. And then maybe after a few seasons, et cetera, found something there. What did folks notice differed maybe between the faculty interview process or path and what you observed moving into industry in that type of interview setting?
The biggest difference is definitely how short the industry applications are compared to the faculty applications, not having to do all the research statement and teaching statements. And yeah, that was definitely nice.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree with that. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I would just say I found them to be similar in the numbers of interviews. So in all of the industry jobs I've applied for, I've had at least 3, if not 4 or 5 individual interviews, sometimes a panel presentation or some kind of product I have to produce for the interview. So that has felt similar.
I was going to add on to Dominic that I chose not to apply on this most recent cycle. You know how Dominic said he split his time or whatever, but I was like, no, because the brain space is so different for me. Like the academic application with the teaching statements and the research, like it's just so different than the private sector. For the private sector, I focused on, you know, informational interviews, connecting with people. You know, you have like I had a 1-page resume. Like it was just very different. And I was like, I've tried the academic in the past and I'm not even doing it this time because it's a very long process.
Yeah, and I think adding to Kinga's point, when it came to the interviews, I was interviewing for both. It seemed that the academic interviews were very structured in a way, like you almost knew what you had to say. You know, you had 2 minutes to get people interested in your research. And then once they are interested, you talk more about your research and it's very pre-prepared. But I think in industry, it's much more important to have been organic and be natural because questions come up, informational stuff, behavioral stuff come up, and connecting with people and just being yourself, I think was more important. So I think that interview process I found was where the biggest differences were.
So have you figured something out there that I never did? I didn't know I was supposed to get folks interested in my research. Who knew that was a goal in the faculty positions. And I like your point about authenticity in interviewing. How did folks find that showed up for them? Did anyone have trouble with, you know, I've sometimes seen folks when they're going in interviews feeling like it's a test or an audition or something like that. Anyone want to speak to just interview mindset and sort of how finding that way towards authenticity?
I'll say something. So I had this conversation just yesterday on LinkedIn. Somebody said that they never prepare for interviews in the private sector. They go in and the conversation is organic. And I'm like, yes, how come nobody's talking about that? Like I never prepare for interviews. Like I go in there, I know what I know what I do. And I'm okay like selling myself, but I'm not practicing any canned questions. Like we're gonna have a conversation and we either hit it off or we don't. And if we don't, that's okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things that helped me, you know, get to this mindset before was actually talking to people in industry. I think what we don't realize as academics often, or at least I didn't realize in school, was that people are very generous with their time usually in industry. So if you truly reach out to someone, they will talk to you. And that helps, you know, knowing that, yes, your interview is meant to be organic. You are meant to talk about yourself and, you know, there are no kind of structured right answers that you should be ready with.
And so on that point of conversation, I know Kinga mentioned informational interviews, which I love. Can folks speak to maybe how they did informational conversations and whether those were useful to them in making the leap?
That's how I got my job. I mean, that's every interview I've ever gotten has come through some kind of networking, whether it be a referral or me reaching out to somebody and just on LinkedIn and just saying, I think your job looks really interesting. Do you have 15 minutes to tell me about it? So not asking them for anything other than tell me about you and tell me about your job and then leaving it there, right? Sometimes that ends up being a referral or it can lead to something more, but not really going into it, right, with any expectations. And that to me has been the key, I would say, in all of my industry. So my current job, and then any other kind of networking I've done, for sure.
I can't stress Christina's point enough. Like, I think that's, no matter how, like in economics, the job market is a little structured. You have interviews in the same time and so on across like academic and non-academic positions, everything. But I think reaching out to people, especially industry, without any expectations, without giving them the burden of, like this has to go into a referral, I think that is very, very helpful. Like, about the role, you get a sense of the culture, and those things are very important signals before you go into the recruiting cycle. And like I said, I was very amazed to find that people are very generous with their time. So if you reach out and say 15 or 30 minutes, they are very happy to do that.
Me too. I got my job through informational interviewing, just like Christina. And I love Christina's script. The recording is worth that. So yeah, I reached out to somebody and I said, I like your job title. I'm curious about what you're doing at this company. Do you have time to chat? And she did. And when we did, she's like, my company's hiring. And I was like, oh, are they? I honestly didn't know. And I applied and I got the job. I mean, like, it's wild.
Yeah, that was a big part of when I applied as well, that doing the informational interview before actually applying.
Nice. And so many of you use this in the setting of, I'm not asking for a job, I'm asking about a job, and then things emerge from that. And so I'm curious, panel, how many of you, of the PhDs in your network who may have moved to industry, how many do you know who got their role through uploading their resume to a job website?
I don't know anyone. I think everyone I know has been through some kind of connection.
I think people have gotten jobs that way. Again, I'm part of that Facebook group and they're just like constant chatters. People have gotten jobs that way. It's possible. Let's not discount that path. But I mean, I kept track of my applications and like, I don't know, 90% of them that I applied to through the application portal went nowhere.
And I highlight that because I think a lot of folks look to leave and start with their resume, but actually starting with these conversations so that you can hone your resume and then pass it to folks can often be beneficial. And many folks I encounter coming from academics see this as networking and that it's somehow a dirty word or that it's uncomfortable for introverts. Anything that helped you in these informational interviews to become more comfortable reaching out, as Utsav has mentioned, folks are generous with their time, but anything that helped in terms of feeling comfortable with this type of outreach?
One of the things that helped me was just knowing that the people who I'm talking to are also, often past academics, or at least have gone through the PhD process. So they are likely to understand, if I'm awkward or if I'm hesitant to ask questions. And I think that overcoming that barrier, knowing that these people were in your shoes, like, 2 years, 3 years ago, I think that helped me loosen up for sure. So I think that's just a block that I would start with first.
I think also it's useful to know that people who you might be asking for informational interviews also are getting something out of that. It's not just like you're asking for their time, but they also are looking for future colleagues, or there could be benefit for them for referring people to who ultimately get hired. So like, it's not just an ask. They're very happy to do it, not just because they're generous, which I'm sure they are as well, but there could be other reasons too that they are happy to do that. And I'll also just say that, like, I definitely felt like that as a graduate student. Like, networking thing stressed me out, and for some reason I don't feel that way as much anymore. I don't know if it's the difference in the culture or what.
I'm an introvert, and so I can relate to the hesitancy to put yourself out there. But my advice would be to just put that aside, because the yield in actually getting something from the work you're doing to get a job in outside of academia, it's so worth it if you can just, spend a couple minutes a day reaching out to people and just don't take it personally if people don't respond to you. And if they respond and say, no, I don't have time, I think it was like something I had to keep telling myself that that's okay, right? Just to keep at it, and it's worth it to kind of push through those feelings.
I would just add that you could ease yourself in, and also like terrified of networking, very terrifying stuff. But now I actually really enjoy it. So I would say ease yourself in with people that you kind of know. Like my very first conversation was some very loose acquaintance that I came across somewhere, and he emailed me about something, and there in his job title was data scientist. I was like, okay, let me talk to this person. So I kind of knew him, and then I started with that. And then I started talking to just complete strangers. And let me tell you, I loved every single one of those conversations. And they were like really enjoyable, nothing uncomfortable about them.
So much opportunity to learn, and a fair thing to start small or start with someone who just seems familiar. And so I want to move to some more of what you do day to day and how that compares to academics. But there's a question in the chat I want to field, and maybe I'll pause here if folks in attendance have questions. This is a good moment to drop them in the chat. Panel, there's a question here about stability of jobs in the private sector. Folks may be reading in the news about layoffs. And so can folks speak to stability relative to academic roles? What do you see there?
I think people grab onto this idea of tenure, and they think of that as stability. But I've embraced instability. This has been part of my transformation from academic to private, to embrace instability and kind of prepare for it and almost expect it, or maybe even want it. You know what I mean? Like, I am constantly now networking for my next role, my next opportunity. I have no plans to stay at my current company forever. And even my coworkers know this. I think it would serve everybody to just kind of accept this personal growth and think of their career as I don't know, something that they're building, instead of I've spoken to plenty of academics who are I want to leave academia and land in a company where I could stay forever. And I'm just like, why?
I think there are other ways of thinking about stability too. My wife got an opportunity across the country on the East Coast. I'm in Seattle right now. And I'm going to be going fully remote in the fall, and still working at the same company, which I feel like that's not really an opportunity normally in academia. So there are opportunities like that can create their own kind of stability as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I totally hear this question as somebody who's perpetually worried about money and losing my job is always, I worry our family would struggle. But my husband also left academia, and our salaries now have helped us so much financially in such a short time that even if that were to happen, we would be okay. We would have never been okay on our academic salaries. Is one. I think the other is the skills I've gained in this 1 year make me so marketable for so many jobs that I'm not limited to this tiny, narrow focus. And so I'm not as concerned if there were a moment of instability. But I also think that, paying attention to what's happening in the tech world is important. Knowing which companies have their health is positive, is good too. So thinking strategically is something I try to do too, and looking in next opportunities. For sure.
Yeah, and I'd add a little bit to Dominic's point. I think that resonates with me the most. I think in academia there is this idea of tenure, which if you get there is going to be very stable. But first, it's not an easy path to get there. It's not a certain path to get there. And I think more importantly, you are committing to being in a location which could be literally anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world. But I think industry gives you the flexibility. So if you are looking for that kind of stability, like being remote or, moving wherever you want to, or, using your marketing, using your skills to transition to something else quickly, I think that's a different kind of stability, which you'll get in industry for sure.
Just to add an anecdote there, I'm now running into faculty members looking to move because they need to move, right? They can no longer work in the location where they are. Maybe their spouse or partner has something else. And so academics is very limiting there. As well as one point I want to circle on, I hear actually two I want to circle back on, salary and skills. So salary, folks on the panel, how many of you were surprised by just how much higher the industry salaries were?
Shocked.
Right? Like, I think there's a sense when we're in academics of, okay, we're paying some costs to stay there, but the salaries are quite large, right? Relative to that, there's a big, sometimes, life-changing difference there. Anyone want to speak to that? And again, we don't have to get into actual numbers, but just to sort of the comfort or opportunities with the salary.
I mean, I would just say definitely life-changing for me. And then it's sort of the new baseline is different, right? Because once you have that higher salary, at least for me, I want to make sure that, we're maintaining that as a family. But I will say that I can be much more clear now around like what kind of job I want. And that becomes more of how I'm focusing, the environment I'm going to work in, the type of job I want to be doing every day, the company I want to work in. I can get clearer on that because I don't have this tunnel vision on like, I need to make more money because I know that I'll make enough in industry. So I have found that that's like a consequence of it is that I've gotten really clear on the type of job I want instead of just taking, right, like the first thing that's going to give me a high salary.
Something I don't know how like other organizations work. But one thing I was surprised about in my role was that I think I've had 3 salary adjustments since I got here. Like, and that's much more regular, seems to be a much more regular part of the process outside of academia, which is kind of cool.
I agree with that.
For me, it was also life-changing. I mean, I could give you an anecdote. So I was applying to like a consulting firm and I'm like in the data space. So I was researching like data analyst salaries and stuff. So, and I landed somewhere around 80,000 because I made 50,000 as a postdoc. I was like 80,000, like entry level. I don't know. I'm not expecting too much. And so I was talking to a recruiter at this company and she's like, what's your salary range? And of course, like, I don't know, you're not supposed to answer that question, but I did because I'm a wuss. But so I was like, so I said, like 60 to 80 or whatever. And she's like, well, we're offering 120. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I really appreciate that. She like, I don't know, didn't stick to my ridiculous range, but I just wanted to kind of throw some numbers out at you. And I did eventually get that offer, although I declined it. But I mean, I was like, what? It blew my mind.
And I think the one other thing that struck me was also kind of looking at the value of your time. Like I think there is a lot of like romanticization of, being in academic positions. And even if you hold the salary, constant and so on, you're still working much, much more hours. So, you're effective, like you're thinking about research all the time, at least till you get tenure and all of that. Whereas now I know that not only I'm, making more money, but I also know that the expectation is that I work 40 hours a week or whatever, like 45 or, a fixed amount of time. And so the value of my time is also much higher. And I think that I also appreciate a lot.
Yeah, Tori, I was just going to add to one thing I struggled with was like how to answer those questions around like what's your salary range and how do you negotiate that conversation. And I did use a lot of the tools that are out there. So, I was applying for roles, I would look up the company on Glassdoor, look for the exact role or something close to it, just so, because I had no sense, I still don't always have a sense of like, what does this type of role make? And it can vary so much in industry. So I would come across roles as a project manager that were in the 60s. And that didn't seem to align for me, you know, compared to what I'm making now. And so those tools were helpful, and they still are, I think, to just get a sense of what you might ask for. And in this, I'm doing interviewing again, to be transparent. And like, I just say what I want, you know, in those conversations now. I just say like, this is the salary that I want. And they'll tell me if it's not in their budget, or I'll say, what is your budget for this role? And see if they'll give me that, you know, before we even start the conversation, especially if it's in a state where by law they have to disclose it. I find that that can work, should work in those instances.
I think, adding on to Christina's point on the like negotiation for salaries, I think one of the things that helped, especially after getting an offer, was that knowing that now the company wants you, so you have the bandwidth. Like, don't feel bad about asking for an increase, or definitely don't feel bad about valuing yourself at where it's worth. And the what I learned also later was that the recruiters are, they essentially get a commission based on whether you convert or not. So it's also in their interests to push you and make sure you take the offer. So asking for that 5% or 10% extra, it's not something you should feel bad about at all.
I agree. Negotiate.
For
It's
sure.
terrifying, but do it.
They expect it.
Recruiters are pro negotiators, but then we still have an opportunity to, right? Even just asking for 5 to 10% more, get there. I remember I, in my first role, materialized a sign-on bonus just by asking, is there a sign-on bonus? No one showed up. I didn't know there were sign-on bonuses, right? So things are possible.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm curious then, one of the questions that's coming up a few times in the chat, and so I'll sort of collapse a few of them, are skills that you leverage from your PhD in your current work, combined with maybe advice on skills folks should build if they're earlier on in their PhD. So can anyone speak to that in terms of aspects of your doctoral training that you use now, or things you might recommend folks put effort into if they're early on in their PhD?
So I'll plug project management because I do think it's in every job. I mean, I see it in like many job descriptions, even if it's not the primary title of the role. So I thought I was doing project management in academia, and I was to a sense, but my current job, I had such a massive learning curve because I was learning the content of the projects I was managing. So a whole new technology system, which was Workday, and the project management language and tools and methodologies and industry. So like that trifecta for me was a lot, to be really honest. And I had a lot of nights of like, I don't know if I can do this, right? Like it's just too much. So if you're interested in project management or think you might be doing that, I would recommend that folks at least do one of those free courses to start. Like I think Google offers an extended course. I think there's other, options where you just start to get a sense of what project management actually is, the language, and then like the standard in industry is the PMP, but that takes some effort to get. I recommend like that skill, I think is cross-functional, kind of traverses different industries. And so I would definitely recommend that if think you're headed in that kind of direction.
I think that's awesome. And it speaks so much about, I don't know, getting hired. Like you had so much to learn, Christina, and yet they wanted to hire, and they probably knew that you had a lot to learn, and they hired you because they knew, that you brought some good stuff to the table. Like, I think that's amazing. And people get hung up on like, oh, I don't know enough. Well, you'll learn it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
I'm in the data tech space. So, I bring these like very specific coding skills, which transferred because I'm an R coder and my company codes in R. So that skill transferred pretty easily. My learning curve was not super steep. I would say I use my problem solving skills a lot. And I think that's probably what I got hired for, my management or the CEO says like, we're here and we need to get here. How do we get here? Figure it out. And I'm like, cool, I'll figure it out. Like, and they trust that I could do it. They trust that I could like figure it out, do the research, code the thing, and I do it on my own without anybody like holding my hand too much.
Well, and I'm curious there, hearing the sort of overlap of skills versus things you need to learn. And for every company, you have to learn how the company works. That happens even when you move from company to company later on. There's always some sort of company specific learning. I guess I'm curious because this comes up with PhDs a fair amount, and there's a question in the chat here. Panelists, if you were to characterize the closeness of what you do now to your dissertation research topic, this being very close, this being like super distant, how close is what you do now to your topic of your dissertation?
Times like this, very, very far apart.
Yeah. Pretty far.
So somewhere from here to here. So say more there. How did folks, maybe if they were stepping away from their dissertation topic or finding ways to put that in industry terms, how's that worked for you?
I think for me, the transition has been relatively easier. I think building on the question of skills, my research was in this very niche field called development economics, but I had all the skills of economics, which helped me with coding and I guess problem solving. And I think those are the skills that I took to work. And a lot of the work I'm doing is very closely tied to the same methods, the same kind of, the same kind of project flows. So that has helped. I let the other panelists go into the details with other fields and so on, but I've worked with folks on my team who've made broader transitions. But I think what's helped are these common skills, like some sort of coding, project management, and just critical thinking. I think those are the things from the PhD which I've seen being used and used almost every day.
And can I go one layer of the onion down on coding and project management? So what do folks mean by those, right? What goes into like day-to-day coding, really like nuts and bolts, and what about project management?
I can start. I mean, my title is project manager, and so I'm responsible for delivering projects to success. And so I'm managing massive budgets and project teams. I am assessing risk every day and mitigating risk, being able to put metrics in place to pass stage gates to move to the next part of the project. So if we're testing something, we have to get to a certain percentage before we move forward. So all that sounds kind of like in the weeds, and I'm very much in the weeds. But I would say, from the PhD, what I use the most is people skills. I was a qualitative researcher, am a qualitative researcher, come from a social science background, have an administrative background in higher education, and I do so much negotiation, right? So like something's not working in a project, we need to move it forward. How do we get through that challenge so we can get to the other side? I don't manage any people directly, but I am responsible for the work at the end of the day. So there's a lot of negotiation amongst the team and their managers to kind of make sure that folks are contributing as they should, and contributing to the project. So I find I use that a lot. And then to circle back to my point just about the big learning curve, I for sure I'm happy I have the PhD, because when I don't know something, I know how to find the answer. I'm not going to stop until I find the answer, and I know how to do that, I think, because of the PhD. So that has helped me a lot.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the coding. I think especially if you're interested in quantitative fields, I would say at least one statistical software is going to be very helpful. Of course, R is the bread and butter we mostly use, but I've seen expertise in everything from Stata to Python, and something would be very helpful. And the other thing I didn't know in grad school was that a lot of companies use SQL, which is a relatively easy language to learn, but has a lot of value in investing that time to learn. I think that's mostly what I would say about coding.
For me in coding, my company builds flood risk maps it's very specific. So I use coding, like I said, I code in R to pull data, crunch data, analyze, visualize, a lot of like background stuff to inform our decision. And then also I use the code to build the final map and the final report for the client. So there's just a lot of flexibility in how we code and what we code for. Sometimes it's internal and sometimes it's external.
Just to backtrack a little bit, my role is actually very similar to what I was doing in academia. And I really liked what I was doing and like the topic that I was studying. So I applied for a range of things, some of which were like others are saying, more focused on kind of bringing the skills to a new area. But there are some positions outside of academia that also might allow you to continue doing the work that you're interested in doing in academia, but outside of that context.
And so I'm curious, Dominic, doing something fairly close, if you were to characterize any differences between how you do things now versus how you might have done them as a graduate student, what stands out?
I definitely work with a much wider range of people. So it's not just like other people who have an academic background, but I'm in the education research org. And so I'm working with like teachers and people who are designing programs with kids and people who are more like writing and communicators, that sort of thing. So there's a bigger kind of more interesting, I think, team of people working on some of the research that we're doing. Another big difference is my like research program is definitely broader than it would be in academia. I think that's something that one of the reasons why I was interested in possibly leaving academia is that like I liked studying like a variety of different things. And that's something that isn't just like a weakness in, I think, in my application for academic jobs, but like is a strength in my current role. So there are things like that look a little bit different, even though I'm still doing like research and publishing and that sort of thing.
So Dominic mentioned, having a lot more collaborators, some fields would call them stakeholders. And so I'm curious, show of hands, if you can say it, panelists, how many meetings you've had in the past week? And if it's more than 10, maybe you can just do that.
I have a meeting every hour. Yeah, I have a meeting every hour.
Right, and so folks in attendance, you can see that different roles have a big variation in the sort of heads down, heads up work. And I'll make a characterization panel and you tell me if I'm off base. If you're in a management type role, like project management, you've got to be in meetings with people checking in. If you're in a data role, a lot of your work is heads down with your data. And then research may be somewhere in between where you're both getting some heads down and some meeting time. Does that feel fair? Tell me anywhere I'm off base there.
That fits.
Sounds right.
And so for attendees, knowing yourself, okay, do I want to be in a role where I'm talking to folks a lot? Do I want to be in a role where I am with my R script, right? The more sense you can get of yourself and what you enjoy, the better you can match with available roles. One other thing I'm curious about, since folks are about a year in, any headwinds you want to speak to? Anything in terms of culture shocks, major challenges, anything that you encountered that you'd want to make sure other folks are aware of if they're thinking about this type of path?
I see a couple, I think a comment or two about our question about like talking about the PhD and the interview process and sort of how it's perceived. I have found that my PhD is not super valued in my consulting role. It was actually really shocking. I was, really excited to have earned it. And I have found that it's almost like there's skepticism because the folks I work with have been consultants, many of them for their whole careers. And so they see someone like me and they think she doesn't know what consulting is, right? She hasn't been a consultant. She hasn't kind of earned her consulting badge. And so the PhD is almost like does she think she's gonna like know a lot about something that she doesn't? So I've had to juggle that in a really interesting way, almost where I don't put it out front, which pains me. But if it, if it comes up, it comes up, but I don't put it out there in front. I actually have my education at the bottom of my resume, or on the side actually now, because I haven't found that it's something that people are like, yay, she has a PhD, which was a little bit sad for me.
That can be tough.
Yeah.
Other headwinds folks encounter. So definitely different attitudes about what a PhD means out there in industry. What else?
I think one of the experiences I've had is like interactions with your advisor versus your manager. I think with advisors, it was often, for me at least, that I would find a problem, be stuck with it, and then it would be kind of 2 weeks till I would bring that up with my advisor in grad school, which was fine. But I think in industry, I had to get used to the fact that if I'm struggling with something for a day, I bring it up with my manager the next day, that we don't have time to waste. So, what's the better way, more efficient way to solve this? So yeah, I wouldn't call that a headwind really, but it was definitely an attitude change or a change of culture that I faced.
I agree with
that. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I had like, my headwind was kind of going off of what Utsav said. I was kind of in my own way, like in my company, the PhD was actually very well received, and in a lot of my conversations and interviews, it was very well received. But I think in my own head, I was like, well, I have a PhD, I need to figure this out on my own instead of asking for help. So my team expected me to ask for help, and like, it's normal and cool and great. It helps the team move forward. But I'm just like, I shouldn't be asking for help. Like, I need to figure this out on my own. I have a PhD. So I had to learn to ask for help.
Well, and this relates to someone asking about habit changes in the chat, that I can figure it out myself versus, no, wait, I've got to figure it out quickly, and I've got to flag to someone that this is a blocker. Those are not things you would have necessarily done with your supervisor, because if you spent a month investigating it, you sort of didn't have the same maybe time pressure or dependencies that exist.
Yeah, I think maybe Dominic mentioned pace earlier, and I have found like pace it's so fast. I mean, we do everything on Slack, and it's like decisions, conversations, everything gets done in that moment, and waiting too long sometimes can turn into something bigger than it should. So that has been a real change, I think, in just the day-to-day of getting things done and having collaborations with folks. Very fast.
On pace, what's the typical life cycle for a project you're working on? Just quick, around there, is it a day? Is it a month? Is it 6 months? What are folks' life cycles?
I think our projects are slightly on the longer end, like anywhere between 3 months to 9 months, I would say.
Workday implementations are 1 year to 2 years. So they're actually quite long. If they're enterprise and they're multiple projects, they can be up to 4, 5, 6 years. So they're really long. And that's one of the challenges, I think, is for me, I like to see something through. And if I haven't lived it yet, it's hard for me to speak to it confidently. And so when looking at jobs, I do look at that now, like, what is the cycle of a project? Is it shorter? Will I gain that experience more quickly instead of having to kind of live through the duration of these long ones?
For us, it's also about a year or so, like it's the longer term project that we're chipping away at.
Yeah, for me, it's a year probably. Yeah, even though we're still doing it's a similar like cycle as like the research projects I was doing in graduate school as a postdoc. But like we figure out like our yearly budget, which that was something that was a difference. And so like, even if in academia, I think sometimes research projects would extend longer, like all these kind of constraints that are pushing you to like have it kind of figured out within a year.
Yeah, budget management constraints definitely figures in more when you're in industry. And so we've got about 7 minutes left, and I have 2 questions I want to get to if we can. One being, you know, folks are talking, and I know, Christina, you're mentioning like looking for your next job and things that you know now. And so things that you've sort of learned in your first year that you're taking into year 2, or maybe, you know, sort of things you're encapsulating that as you look towards next year are shaping your goals. Very open-ended question, but sort of spin for yourself as you're at that moment of sort of year 1 to year 2. What have you learned and what's that got you thinking about next?
I know exactly what I'm looking for. So I don't want a customer facing role or client facing role. I find as a project manager, it's just a different flavor. I'd rather be internal facing. So facing employees is something that I definitely want. I mentioned the 3 kids. So I need more. I have sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 meetings an hour. I have to decide which one to prioritize. That just doesn't work with my family. So I need upfront need to figure out like what's the culture around that at a company. And then I see a question in the chat about societal impact. My research had a social justice focus, and in industry, I think one of the nice things is a lot of companies sort of wear on their sleeves what their values are. And you can find out from some of those informational interviews if they're legit, if they live them. And that's definitely something I'm looking at is, you know, what's the day-to-day like for companies around the values they espouse, and looking for a company that's really putting their money and their day-to-day, you know, around those values for sure.
Nice. So I'm hearing sort of, you know, role match, balance match, company value match,
yeah,
improvement opportunities.
Yeah.
Nice. What else, folks?
In terms of going into year 2, I'm starting to move into more of like a managing role. So managing some other people, and I've really enjoyed that. So that's, yeah, a change, I guess, that I've enjoyed.
So almost stepping into a new role, even though you're in the same organization and domain area.
Mhm.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I think I would be on the same page as Christina, and I was looking at the same question on the chat. I think I know now that so in grad school I worked on economics of developing countries, and now I know that kind of research is at least marginally possible in industry. So I know that future roles I want to work with, you know, with research that allows me to answer questions, you know, across the globe and across communities and so on.
On that, Foundry 10, where I work, is basically a nonprofit, and there are like other jobs like that yeah, I think have like a clear mission.
Yeah, my company is a climate technology company. So, and I'm an environmental scientist. So we're working on, you know, flood risk and flood reduction. I feel that my work is very impactful. And so I feel really good. So there are jobs out there that could, I think, satisfy that kind of like impact, that if you want to make that. And in terms of goals, like I'm lost in terms of my goals, which I think is okay. I'm trying to figure it out, but just know that you don't have to have it all figured out after year 1. I love how clear Christina is. My team lead is like, what are your goals? And I'm like, I don't know. So year in, I'm like still happily plugging away at whatever I'm doing. And I'm just like really happy in this role. And I don't have any like huge goals and visions, although I am going through like an exercise. I bet like Tori gives that to her clients, where I'm just like really trying to figure out what it is about my each task every day that's like bringing me joy and what's like a downer, so that could help me figure out what are the things that I like really like doing that could direct me in the future.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that, Kinga. One of the things I enjoy most in terms of person job fit is knowing yourself and knowing the job. And when you're leaving academics, you don't actually know that much about your job data because you've only done this one job. And you don't actually know that much about the opportunities. So your first fit may be a little bit imprecise. And so taking the learnings of what do I know now about industry roles, what do I know about myself, and continuing to hone, if that's building within your organization, finding a new organization. I think there's a lot of opportunity to continue to craft, and that the sort of every 6 months, every year cadence is reasonable to look at it. Tell me if I'm off base there, panel. Tell me what you think.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah.
And so we've got 2 minutes, and I wanted to quickly scan folks for learnings. And so knowing that we've got 2 minutes, really just sort of coming with, a couple of maybe words or a sentence. And I guess panel, something that you're taking away from today, something that has stood out to you, a learning and observation from our conversation. So Kinga, I'll start with you.
I think I've just enjoyed Christina's clarity. I'm trying to get there. And it's okay if I'm a little bit slow. Like I said, I am not knocking anybody who is in the boat with me and taking it slow, but I think it's good to get clarity on what you want and what you need and what makes you happy. Cause I think that's really great.
I think Tori, I think you summed up some of the responses in terms of thinking about what activities you enjoy doing. I think I wasn't necessarily thinking about that while I was applying for positions. I was thinking I guess the subject matter a little bit more, but how that aligns with what activities you'll be doing, how you'll be spending your day to day. And I'll be thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with Kinga. I think I enjoyed Christina's clarity and everyone else's clarity and honesty a lot. I think these are the same questions I was grappling with a year ago, and it's good to know that there are so many different ways to think about it. I've enjoyed that.
Yeah, I know I seemed clear, but I spent a year unclear. So, I do think I had an identity crisis, I don't know what I want to do. And I wish I had done that activity of what brings me joy. Kinga, you mentioned that. And Dominic, you said that resonated for you too. I think that is something I wish I had spent more time on, but I also think it's okay to take a job if it sounds like it might be a good fit. And then to Tori's point, evaluate, take your pulse on it as you go through. I think that's also perfectly fine, not to get lost in the, I don't know what to do. But what I'm taking away is I'm really inspired by that there are jobs where you can have a social impact. I think that'd be something that I would be looking for sure in my next role.
Nice. Well, thank you, panel, for sharing your stories with candor and authenticity and wit and humor around all these different things that you have learned and found. I know I've found it really insightful and informative, and I'm sure our attendees have as well. So attendees, take a moment to thank our panel for sharing their time with all of you. And I know you can see the thank yous coming in the chat. For folks who want to connect, we'll drop our LinkedIns in the chat so that folks can follow up if need be. But I hope that everyone in attendance today has a sense of opportunity for what's possible with doctoral training in industry roles. And so my hope is that you're walking away from today with opportunity, information, inspiration on how to grow your career, attendees and panel alike. So thanks again, panel, for making the time. Thanks, attendees, for making the time. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for putting this together, Tori.
Thanks,
Really
Tori.
appreciate that. Right.